Okay, so here's an example of homologous structures across a bunch of different mammals. So if we were to look at the arm of a human, the foot of a horse, of a cat, a wing of a bat, a bird, and a whale, you'll see that we all share the same major bone structure. Our bones look different, but we all have these two joints. We have one at what is the human elbow, so you can see that joint retained in all the structures, as well as this femur bone, which is much shorter in a whale and much longer in a human, but still the same basic structure. And again, a radius and ulna, and then we have our metatarsals. Is that the feet? I forget. But anyway, it's greatly enlarged in the whale and then in the human, but overall, same gross structure. So basically, these body plans have been, and we've got a bird here, which is not a mammal, but also has these analogous or these homologous structures. So these bones have changed their phenotype over time, just as these organisms have changed their genotype, and we see in the more closely related species a closer or less of a difference between the phenotypes. So this is another piece of evidence for evolution. There was a common ancestor at one point between all of these organisms that had this structure of bones. Okay, so homologous structures, another one. Okay, second to last piece of evidence is something called ontogeny. So ontogeny is the study of development of organisms. So if you are to look at here we are. If you were to look at the embryos, the developing embryos of fish, salamanders, turtles, chickens, rabbits, humans, you'll see that the structures at the very beginning of development are remarkably similar. This is evidence for evolution because it goes to show that very early on in development, how we develop across all these species is shared. So the very early genes that determine what's going to become your head and what's going to become your butt, what's going to become your tummy and what's going to become your back, so dorsal ventral patterning as well as anterior posterior, so dorsal ventral, tummy versus back, anterior posterior, head versus butt, essentially. All those genes that determine what's going to go where are the same in the fish, the salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, human, or very similar. They're called homeobox genes. And you had a little group quiz a while ago on that, how that's evidence for evolution, or that was a question in a group thing that you did a little while ago. Okay, so the development of an organism and the fact that very early on in embryonic development we share all these similarities with these organisms is another piece of evidence for evolution. And the last piece of evidence that I'm going to talk about that's potentially the most compelling is the molecular evidence. Whoops. So this molecular evidence is essentially looking at genomes of all different types of organisms and looking for relatedness, looking for how similar these genomes are to one another. And we can use those to create trees that show relationships between different types of organisms found on the earth today. And it turns out that actually, the New York Times just published an article recently about a new and updated tree, and I'm going to import the image in here for you. Okay, so here is the most recent tree published that exists. And you can see, so life is so diverse, and the majority of different types of life that we see on Earth are actually bacterial. So bacteria have huge amount of variety. And then archaea is also extraordinarily diverse. And then all of eukaryotes can be found on this little branch of the tree of life. This node right at the center here represents our shared common ancestor. So the origin of life is seen right there. Everything that's on the tips represents what we see today in the world. And all the branches, all the little branching nodes, represent when there is a divergence or a speciation event. And again, these classifications are made based on genetic sequences and how similar they are to one another. So all of eukaryotic life is located down just on this small arm of the whole tree. So this includes protists, plants, fungi, and animals. So we are here in this, I think we're in the Amebos, or is that, I'm going to look that up. Okay, I was wrong. We're actually in this one, the Opisthoconata, that one, this group. So this comprises all animals as well as some things that used to be classified as fungi. Okay, so this, again, is the most compelling piece of evidence we have for common ancestry. The fact that we all share the same genetic blueprint, in that the codons that code for amino acids are shared between all of life, and the similarities between our DNA sequences for really primordial things like ribosomes and what are the really important things? I guess the structures like ATP synthase would be very similar in all of these organisms. It gives really strong weight to the fact that they all came from the same place, because the probability of that evolving independently 2 times is much greater than of it evolving once and then diverging out. So these are just some of the pieces of evidence for evolution, and we're going to talk about more as the term goes on, but this screencast is long enough, so I'm going to stop it now.